Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm very excited for this fine morning. Just a quick reminder, there is a lunch to learn tomorrow in the JCA. There'll be food and, of course, learning. And a big thank you to the Chiefra family for sponsoring. We'll be talking about Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, and we'll be learning life lessons of that we could that we could put into our daily lives from our forefather Yaakov, Jacob. So please join us, preferable in person. We will still have a Zoom option, but sooner or later, probably the lunch to learn is going to phase out of the Zoom option. But please join us in person. Okay, so we are up to page 216, day 72. 216, page 72. And we are up to a very interesting discussion. So until now, primarily, we were discussing about what you're allowed to say. Right? What could you say? What can't you say? We started talking a little bit about what could you listen to, what you can listen to, when is the prohibition of listening, right? What happens if you heard something? Is that a prohibition? And we spoke about that a little bit. Now we're going to continue with that discussion regarding being a listener. All right. What are you allowed to listen to and what you're not allowed to listen to? So again, page 216, day 72. So let's look at this interesting scenario, and I want to know what your thoughts are. Your neighbor, I don't have a beard. Right? Your neighbor comes to you, right, with a brilliant business idea, and you decide to launch a partnership. As you tell your brother about the idea, he says, "Do you know what happened with the last business idea?" I added that word idea. Are you permitted to hear what comes next? All right. So you neighbor, a friend, or a stranger, or someone you know, or whatever happens to be the case they have as a neighbor, right? And you're telling your brother, "I'm so excited! I'm going to make my next million with my new partner. It's going to be great. We're going to be, investing in who knows what. We're coming up with this great. I was just in St. Louis, as you all know, for my nephew's bar mitzvah, and it was really, really nice. It was nice to be with family. I met some nieces and nephew that I never met before, right? Because it's been 3 years since we saw a lot of the family. And I was talking to one of my brother-in-laws who lives out in LA, and he was telling me about this business. He was business idea. I mean, actually, he started it, and with his partners and this and that. It was just things come up, different ideas. I don't know. He's selling, high-end spices or something. I don't know. And people come up with who knows what, right? And people buy who knows what. Good for him. Right? I hope he's successful. I told him if he's really successful, I'll hold him up for a donation later. But on a serious note, right? People are constantly coming up with ideas, and some are good, some are bad, right? And also some people some people have a success rate, some people don't have a success rate. And so now your brother, right, is telling you that last time this guy's business belly flopped, right? They didn't really go. Are you allowed to listen to him? Or you're not allowed to? Well, what are you supposed to do, right? Are you permitted to hear, right? What comes next? Or do you have to stop him in his tracks, right? Or are you allowed to listen? What do you guys think? Any thoughts?
He's looking out for you.
Okay, but just because he's looking out for you, remember we said that doesn't necessarily always give you permission, right, to hear or to say. But right now we're talking about you. Now what if he's doing right or wrong? Right? Are you allowed to listen to what he had to say? Are you allowed to continue to listen? Right? Say, hey, what else do you know? Right? Or do you have to say, okay, I hear you. That's it. I'm done. It's Lashon Hara. I can't listen to this. Right? It's talking more about the listener. So you're right. He is looking out for you. The question is, how are you supposed to react to that?
He has information that that you need to know because it could hurt you.
Oh, so you're saying that since this could hurt you, right? So therefore, you're allowed to listen to that. You're allowed to assume that it's true.
I think you need to listen to hear enough of it so that you could look into it further.
You just said the magic word. So you didn't say that you're allowed to assume that it's true. You said you're allowed to listen enough that you could look into it more. Okay, very good. Let's hear if anybody else has anything to add. Anybody else?
Could you just do it like, good morning?
Good morning, Emily. Nice to have you on board.
Sorry, I'm just getting myself together here. Could you just say like, you know, I don't know. I'm assuming if you could say like, I don't really want to speak Lashon Hara, or listen to Lashon Hara, but I don't want to, I don't want to get into a bad deal, but I don't know, like, could you generically ask for information without getting like the whole story? Like, I don't really want to hear what happened. Just do you think it's a good idea or bad idea? Could you say something like that? Like, I don't need to know. Like, I don't need to know what happened,
Right. So you could, but by just asking if he thinks it's a good idea or not a good idea, for you as a business person, you have to be able to also know why it's not a bid. Maybe he went into an industry that he didn't know anything about, but this one he knows more about, right? Maybe he had a bad partner. It was really the partner's fault. It wasn't this person's fault. So for yourself, I'm just saying, I'm not saying you're allowed to or not. I'm just saying from your perspective, that's not a smart idea. Right? You can, I'm not a business person, but really dealing with anything, you can't just say, what do you think is a good idea? You have to know more background for you to be able to know all the scenarios of why. Just because, and this happens all the time, with teachers, parents say, oh, that's a bad teacher. Maybe for your child it's a bad teacher. Maybe it was a bad year. Maybe it was the teacher and the kid didn't, they didn't get along. They just clashed, and that happens. Right? It could be a great teacher, right? But sometimes, it's just a scenario, what happened that year, or something went on, or the kid was really hard on those 3 other hard kids, and or sometimes just the personalities don't get together. So we can't rely, and it's a very important thing. You can't just rely on someone's recommendation, just blanket without knowing the details. That's really Lashon Hara, because you're just blindly listening to what that person said without knowing all the details. Suzette?
Sure. Good morning. So I'm adding to this thought that, I'm a business person, and these are what I like to think of anyway as the informal references, really. So in looking at this scenario, this is something that, I'm faced with from time to time, and I want to know the details, especially when, there are financial consequences involved. So I say that to say that in business that I deal with, I probe for more information without going after, I'd say the person directly, but probe for more information on, there's, the successes and failures, and, how recent the information is and relevant to what we're doing. So,
okay,
so me, I probe. So I guess my answer is yes, I want to hear more.
Okay, so that, and I hear what you're saying, and you are probably no, I don't know, it could be other people are business, but you probably are a big business person here on the chat, on the Zoom, but that is what you might do as a business person. The question is now, right, regarding halacha, right? Because business has to work with halacha, right? There's a whole section of the Code of Jewish Law that's regarding business law, right? For example, one of the big ones is, interest, right? You're not allowed to take interest from a Jew, right? So, there's a whole line of business out there of interest and how to deal with that. So the banks in Israel, right? Actually, there's a way of dealing with it, something called, right? Heteriska. There's a whole complicated, Talmudic halakhic discussion and a contract, right, that is written up with the bank and the Beis Din, and I don't want to get into it, right? But there's ways of dealing with it. That's just one example. It's an easy one to talk about, right? But there's pages upon pages on halacha upon halacha of business law. So this is not business law, right? But this is law that might affect our business dealings, right? So I'm not saying that you're wrong regarding, and who am I to tell you that you're wrong regarding your business dealings, right? Because I'm still trying to balance my checkbook. No, I'm just kidding, right? But right, but regarding halakha, what is the proper way of doing it, right? And this is where really, that famous statement that Judaism is not a religion, Judaism is a lifestyle, right? It's a lifestyle that goes into every aspect of our lives. If it's in synagogue, if it's in our home, on vacation, and in our business, and in our workout, and whatever we do, right? Judaism is not a religion. A religion is what you sort of do in synagogue or for spirituality. Judaism is to make yourself, right, into a better person through our relationship with God, and that's in all our aspects of life. And we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow in the lunch to learn about Jacob. Right, we know Jacob really had all aspects of life. He was learning 14 years in Shem Ve'ever in the yeshiva. He was in the workforce. Right, he had hardship. He had good times. Right, and we'll talk more about Jacob tomorrow. Excuse me. Right, but that's our point of it. So you're right. Maybe in the business world, right, we gotta dig deep as far as we can, right? The question is, how does that work with that? And I'm not saying not to do it. I'm not saying that's wrong, right? The question is, how do we do that, right, and still stay within the confines of halakha, right? That we can make sure that we don't transgress or do an aveira of lashon hara. Go ahead.
So my thought is that you stay within the halakha if you're not talking negatively about the person, but you're probing about the business relationship as it will affect your decision. That's how I.
Okay, good. Excellent point. So we have two very good points, and anybody else want to chime in? Cindy, Marilyn, anybody else? Fran? Okay, so go ahead.
No, I'm saying no, I'm good.
Oh, okay. I just saw you mute yourself. All right, so we have two very powerful points that were pointed out, right? And I want to expand on that, and that's really our discussion today a little bit. Right? Number one, we had Chayaleh point out that this is what we would call toelas, right? It's to prevent yourself, right? Now we dissect it a little bit. It doesn't mean to say that you have to believe everything, right? But you have to at least be concerned to be able to look a little more. And now we have Suzette pointing out a good point, right? Also, if I'm not talking about the person, I'm just talking about the business, right? Which would make a difference. Let's just take Suzette's point. For that point, we have to be very careful. Because a lot of times I'm not talking about the person, I'm just talking about the scenario, right? So I'll just give you an example, right? It actually happened not too long ago in my household, right? One of my kids was saying something, right? And it was obvious that they didn't say who, right? But it was obvious, right, from the story that it could only be one person, right? It could only be one person based off the details that my kid gave regarding the story. It can only be one person, right? So he said, "You're not allowed to say that, right? That's lashon hara, right?" So he said, "But I didn't say the name." I said, "Yeah, but it's obvious from the points that you're bringing out of who it is." And we spoke about that before in one of the classes. Right? Just because you're not saying a name, right, doesn't mean to say that it's not lashon hara. If from all the details that are being said, right, it's obvious who it is, right? So that is implied lashon hara. It means to say that it is obvious who you're talking about. You say, well, the chief rabbi of Jacksonville, right, of the Orthodox synagogue. I don't want to say who he is. Right, but he's awesome, right? But it could only be one person, right? It's like so you're talking about the business, right? You're talking about the story, you're talking about the thing, right? But it's obvious who it is. So the loophole, as we sort of quote unquote call it, right? I'm not mentioning the name is only a loophole, right? If it's not obvious who you're talking about. Right, so that's just something to remember. On the same time, right? At the same time, it is when we're dealing with toeles, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and that was Chayle's point, right? When we're dealing with toeles, that is, it is still better not to directly, when you don't mention the person's name, you're not directly talking about the person. It's implied lashon hara. It's avak. It's a secondary. It's still prohibited, and then it's still a problem, right? But it's in the severity of it is not as severe, right? And therefore, once we are relying on the concept of toelis, which we'll talk now about in a minute, right? It is still preferable, if possible, right, to still try to avoid mentioning the name, right? Trying to avoid as much as possible to, keep it more sketchy, right, than homing in directly as much as possible, right? Because we're still trying to limit as much as possible. Maybe there is someone that doesn't know the chief rabbi of Jacksonville, right? Maybe there is, right? So you're still trying to keep that within framework. But regarding the concept of toelis, let's just read what they say quickly. And the point is we'll expand on it a little bit. And just as giving negative information is allowed in order to prevent harm, so is listening to it. Anything that can prevent harm to someone else or to yourself, whether financial, emotional, physical, or spiritual, is permitted to be heard. The information should be verified before it is believed and acted upon. And that's the most important line, right? Yes, you're allowed. Kyla, you're right. You're right. And if it's preventing harm, if you're going to sink in, $20,000 or $20 million, it all depends on what the person's financial ability is, right? $20,000 for some people is more than for some people is $20 million, right? It all depends on what your financial capability is, right? It doesn't make a difference how much it is. You're going to invest time, you're going to invest whatever, right? You're going into partnership with someone, your name is on the line also, your credibility of your name, right? So you have to make sure that you're not going to get harmed. You have to protect yourself. There's nothing wrong, right, with protecting yourself, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? But at the same time, right, before you jump to a conclusion or assumption, and that's what we're talking about with Emily's idea, right? Thanks for bringing that up, Emily. You brought it out very clearly, right? That you can't just rely on someone's word, right? We're not saying that the person is lying, right? But you have to go ahead and verify things, right? You have to go ahead and find out what it was, right? All he said was, do you know what happened what happened with the last business, right? Right? Okay, so the last business flopped. Why? Right? Was it the person's fault? Right? Does that make him a bad person? Did he cheat on taxes? Right? Did he embezzle money? Right? Does he just not have a good business idea? Right? Is he just a big dreamer but doesn't know how to implement things? And it could be a million different things, or it could be no, he did everything right. It was just, when they started that last business, COVID hit, and he was going into an industry of entertainment, right? And that's why it flopped. And nothing to do with him. Right? It had to do bad timing, which happens, right? So that doesn't, you can make a statement. You know what happened the last time he opened the business, and boom, oh my gosh, forget it. My gosh, first player, a million things go into your head, and all it was good old COVID, right? That's all it was, right? Good old COVID, right? He couldn't get anybody to work for him, right? The country was on lockdown, and he invested right before he put in, who knows what, and invested in renting a place or whatever, and he went under. And he finally, now after 2 years, he finally got himself out, and he wants to start up again, right? So now that things are open again, it's very possible to be very successful. And so just because it flopped last time doesn't mean to say that there's something wrong with this person, right? So we have to be very careful, right? That we have to verify, right? Verify, and not only verify, find out what the reason is. And again, in the most, we have to try to be as loose as possible, means to say not try to target in that we could be a little more loose regarding the lashon hara component, but at the same time, we have to go ahead, right, and verify. And this reminds me of a similar concept that we find, and we spoke about this in Pirkei Avos, right? When we learned Pirkei Avos many moons ago, right? That there's this idea that you have to don lekavskos, you have to judge everybody favorably, right? And you can't judge someone until you're in their steps, in your feet, right? So, everybody asks this question. You have to judge everybody favorably, and you can't judge anybody until they're in their feet. So why do we have locks in our doors? Why do we have a police force, right? Why do we have a justice? I mean, why do we do any of those? Judge anybody, everybody's great. Come to my house. You're not going to steal. You're not going to do anything, right? Let everybody run around. Let our kids just walk around without any problems because it's, God forbid, there's no one that will ever harm them, right? Why are we doing all this, right? You have to judge everybody favorably, right? Isn't that against judging favorably? So we spoke about this when we learned Pirkei Avos, because you have to have that same balance. You can't judge the individual, but you still have to be smart and protect yourself. Right? You still have to put a lock on your door, right? If you're driving through a dangerous part of town, right? Or if you're driving through Mexico or parts of Mexico City, make sure you have a bodyguard, right? My in-laws, when they lived in South Africa, they had a barbed wire fence, right? An electric fence, actually, a 10-foot fence, stone fence with barbed wires on top, right? You have to live that way, right? Because unfortunately, there was incidents that's going on. That's not being judgy. That's being smart, right? Judgy means to say that you are, as those trying to, that I think this is the point you're trying to bring out. You're judging the individual, right? Saying it's this person's fault. It's this. We don't know what's going on in people's minds. And even, I'll be honest, I tell people this all the time. Even a serial killer, right? It's not for me to judge a serial killer. It's not for me. There's a justice system. He did something wrong. He has to be punished, or she, right? He or she did something wrong. They have to be punished. But it's not for me to start judging the person. Who am I to start judging the person? I have no idea what kind of childhood they grew up in. I don't know what kind of trauma they went through, and I don't know what kind of chemical imbalance they might have or not have. I have no idea, right? Who am I to judge, right? The other person. Judge the action? Of course we have to judge the action. That's law and order, right? You gotta protect yourself. You gotta protect other people, and that's the same idea over here regarding toelas, regarding listening, right? Regarding speaking, it's also right. But speaking, it's your responsibility to protect other people, right? As we say, al tamud al dam rayacha, do not stand idle while your friend's blood is being spilled. I know we spoke about that. That's the reason why we're allowed to say something. And the reason why we're allowed to listen to something, right, is because we have to have law and order. You have to protect yourself, right? God still wants us to protect ourselves, right? So we have to make sure that we minutia this in a way that it's in a safe way, but at the same time that we're protecting ourselves. So as much as you could be a little more loose, right, it's great. But if you have to dig deep in, you still have to. All right, that's why we do background checks, and that's why we do, we call references and things like that, because we have to find out. Now, when you call in the references and start telling you that, that this person, they always leave the garbage cans out in front of their house, that's nothing to do with your business, right? So put that aside, right? Unless you feel that, if the person is not responsible, all right, so therefore they might not be responsible and, I don't know, bringing in the mail, right? Okay, right? But, but you could connect a lot of dots. But typically, if you're, in banking or whatever, or in the kitchen or whatever it is, right? Something like that might not be really something that's you need to hear, right? So you have to be sensitive about what you hear and what you do and what you believe and what you don't believe, right? But at the same time, you have to make sure that you protect yourself, but you can't just blindly listen to a statement. You hear something that triggers a thought that you have to investigate more into it. So that's sort of this idea. Any questions or comments on this?
I have a question.
Go ahead,
No,
Cindy.
I don't know how you said something just now about references.
Yes.
So what if someone, I think we might have talked about this before, but if someone calls me, if I'm a HR person and they call me wanting references about a person that worked for me, how, if they did, whatever I tell them, is that Lashon Hara? Because what if they were not a good worker and I have to be honest?
So you have to be. That's a great question, Cindy, and thanks for asking. That this is sort of the flip side. You're on the component of saying something, not listening to it, right? And now we spoke. But there's a concept, there's an idea of that you're not allowed to al tamod al dam reach, you're not allowed to stand idle while your friend's blood is being spilled, right? Now that doesn't mean necessarily only if someone's blood is actually being spilled, right? But it means to say that someone will be harmed, right? And you know something that the person could prevent that. So it could be that if someone going into a business deal with someone over here, and you know that that person's a cheat, and not just a fly. Let's say if you know that it was bad timing or whatever, he did whatever he can, it just didn't work out. I'd say that's not preventing the person. That's just being a gossiper, right? There's no reason for you to go ahead and tell your brother-in-law, you know what happened to his last business, right? You know the person's a good person. He has other successful businesses. He had other things. This last business happened to flop, right? In situations, you could just say, hey, it sounds great, but just you do your due diligence and making sure that you know everything about this person, right? That's the way to talk about it. If you don't know, you just know something happened, but you don't know details of something, why it happened or whatever. It seems like a normal person. Just say, hey, just like every business deal, just make sure you know all the details of the person, and you know what you're walking into, right? Something like that, a more generic. And Emily, that's where you could say something more generic. You're not saying, do you know what happened to his last business, and just trust me, right? You're just saying, listen, seems like a good person, just like every business. Just make sure you know what you're talking about, right? But if you know something that is harmful, right, to the other person, and it has to be specifically for that job or for that person or for that thing, right? So then, yes, you have an obligation to say something, right? So as working in HR and someone calls you a reference about someone, so, just if they're talking about, the job they're looking into is to become a waitress or a waiter, right, in a restaurant, and, in the job that that they're calling, that you were, they were a secretary and they didn't answer the phone calls properly, or they didn't take good notes. Right, so that doesn't, or they didn't respond to the emails. That not necessarily will make a difference regarding them being a waiter or a waitress, right? Because that's why they changed jobs. They weren't good at a desk. They weren't able to, juggle the hustle and bustle of or they didn't know how to work a computer properly. But that's why they're becoming a waiter or a waitress, because they're able to deliver food, right? So by saying that they didn't do that properly is not necessarily something that will make a difference for what they're looking into. So, I would first ask, in what position are they looking into, right? That I could, address the situation properly based off that position that you're looking into, and that's how I would start the conversation, right? And it's the same thing for any kind of references, regarding, mostly regarding business, but if it's references regarding friends or whatever, you have to know what the scenario is before you start giving just blanket information. You can't just give blanket information. Just because you have information, right, doesn't mean to say that you have the right to give it, right? It has to be that it's directed and it's for that position that will make a difference. Does that make sense, Cindy?
I think so.
Do you have any clarification on that or any questions on that, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Thanks for your question, Suzette.
I think Cindy got to a part of what my comment carries, but the scenario I'm playing over in my head is, okay, so I received this information and I'm now going to verify it, and I go to Cindy. I'll use your name if you don't mind. Do I need, well, I she needs to know why, but I guess one of the concerns is, she has no, prior to me saying, well, I want to verify if I can go into business with this person, she doesn't have any background information on the relationship I have with this person. So in disclosing her information, how does she, I guess, how does she really respond? Does she have an obligation to say, I'm only responding in a very narrow sense based on this particular circumstance that you put before me? Or does she say, okay, let me pause and verify this elsewhere? So I guess it seems that you go up several ladders is what I'm saying, to just get to the truth of the matter.
Yes, of course. I'll tell you like this: when people call me up for references regarding a shidduch, right, a match, right? The first thing I always tell them is that the way I like doing it is, and so I just make it like the way I like doing it. I don't say because of lashon hara or things like that. You know, you start getting into like all these. I'm not starting to blame anybody saying they plan on doing it or not. I'm saying just the way I like doing it is the best way to be able to get the information that you need is why don't you ask me the questions that you want to know, and I will answer those questions to the best of my abilities. Right? I don't want to just start rambling about the individual. Right? There's so much to say, and you know, it might be information that you don't need. So why don't you ask me the questions, and I'll answer those questions. And that's something similar that. You know, and if I'm calling someone from information, I would start the conversation that way also. I'll say, hi, you know, I'm calling about Yankel Pfefferkorn, right? And, you know, I'm going to have a couple of questions. You can just answer my questions, right? Because these are the points I need to know about, right? You know, is he a neat person? Is he, you know, a responsible person? Is Torah important to him, right? Blah, 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 right? If it's for business, you know, is he a hard worker? Is he, right? So, you know, when we spoke references, you know, but when we hired rabbis of the kollel, it's the same thing. You know, we had references, right? And you have to find out about the specific point. So it makes it easier when the person, and I had it once in a while, right? Very rarely, but I had it a couple of times. That same thing when someone called and they said, "Listen, I have a couple of questions. Why don't you just answer my question?" Usually, I have to say that, you know, why don't you ask the questions and I'll answer those questions, right? But it would be from the perspective of the person asking the questions, right? That's how they should start off. Say, listen, this is my business. This is what I need to know, right? Do you have any prudent information regarding X, Y, and Z? Because that's what I need to know about, right? I don't need to know about, you know, what their eating habits are, and I don't need to know about, you know, what color car they drive, right? It doesn't make a difference to me, right? But this is what I need to know. And from the perspective of the person giving the information, let's say just for our example here on the Zoom classes, Cindy's giving the information, right? That really the way it should be approached is it said, thank you so much for calling, right? I'll be happy to help you in any way that I can. Why don't you tell me what you're looking for? Why don't you tell me what business you know this person is interviewing for, that I could, you know, best direct my answers towards what's prudent for regarding your business, right? So in that way you are homing in a polite way, right, in a respectful way, and in a really an efficient way, right? I'll be honest, I can't stand when people start rambling about, you know, blah, blah, blah. I have time. My time is money, right? My time is precious, right? And you know, and I really don't need to be on the phone for a half hour hearing about, you know, how you know, the blah 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 and their grandparents and blah 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 and all that stuff, which is beautiful and great, you know, but I don't need to know about that, right? So it's also more efficient that way. You're getting to the point of what you need to know, right? And you know, you should be prepared beforehand. These are the questions that I want to know, right? And these are the questions I need to answer. Thank you very much for your time, right? You have a wonderful day, right? And in that way also halachically, right, you are homing in on the toelas that you need and to clarify regarding your points. So in both ways, both the person asking and both the person responding. Okay, let's finish off, all right, with a beautiful idea, right? And this is from the Chavos Halvavos, right? The Chavos Halvavos. This is really comes back from David HaMelech, King David, right? But the Chavos Halvavos is a work that was authored by one of the Rishonim, and I forgot the name, right? But he lived around the 1300s, right? He lived somewhere around then. And I think he was actually in Spain, southern Spain, and it was under, at the time, so it must have been around the 1200, it was under Arabic control. southern Spain at the time, and he wrote it originally in Arabic, actually, and it was translated into Lashon HaKodesh, right? The idea is like this, we've been talking about how we have to be careful and that's very important. But sometimes the best defense is a good offense, right? As a hockey player, right, and really any sports, but really in hockey and basketball, I think the most, because other sports, they don't really mix so well, right? You have your defense and then you have your offense, right? Because football, for example, right? You have to wait till you get the ball, right? And hockey and basketball, right? It's constantly movement, right? It's constantly changing, right? It's okay. I don't know why I'm getting into sports so much, right? But a good defense, a good offense is the best defense, right? That's the same idea. In regarding Lashon Hara. Says David HaMelech, right? Turn from bad and do good, right? Sur meira ve'aseh tov, right? It's in our prayer also on Shabbat, right? On Shabbat morning in Pesukei de Zimra, it's in one of the Psalms that King David wrote, and we say it in the Pesukei de Zimra before the Baruch Hu on Shabbat morning, right? There's a song that was made out of it, of course, right? Because what good Psalms no song was made out of, right? So sur meira, right? Sur means to say to move, right? To remove yourself, meira, from bad, ve'aseh tov, and do good. Right, I remember in camp one year, right? I was a big camp guy. I went to camp from the end of grade 3, right, to the end of grade 12. And I'm Canadian, that's why I say grade 3 and grade 12, right? I remember one year our color war teams, right? In our camp, color was a major thing, right? 2-day color war is a major thing, right? And I remember one year the one team was called Sur Meira, and the other team was called Aseh Tov, right? And of course, we had to do songs, and we had to do arts and crafts, and we had to do a big banner or whatever, right? About Sur Meira and Aseh Tov. Okay, I'm getting off topic, right? But, right, Sur Meira and Aseh Tov, King David is telling us the way to how we have to govern our lives. On one hand, we have to Sur Meira, we have to remove ourselves from that. And that's what we've been talking about, all the techniques and all the laws of Lashon Hara, and not only Lashon Hara, excuse me, but everything else. But right now we're focusing on Lashon Hara, right? But, if it's eating kosher, right? Sur Meira, I remember talking once to someone, they were working on eating kosher, and I don't remember, it was here in Kansas, right? But they said, it's really hard. Every day I go to work and I pass by my favorite, breakfast place, right? It's just so hard. I drive by it, and I just started, and it's every day I'm like so tempted to go in. So I said, is there a different route that you could take to work? He said, yeah, but it's like 10 minutes longer. I said, so do it, right? It's worth the 10 minutes, right? Sur Meira, you have to remove yourself from the bad. It means you have to remove yourself from your desires, from your hardships, right? So if it's an extra 10-minute drive, right, it's not the end of the world. On the contrary, you're going to gain much more from that because you're not being tempted every day. And as you build your immunity, sort of, right, quote unquote, right? So in a year from now, you can start driving back down that road if you want, right? But Sur Meira, we have to remove ourselves from bad. And that's just one example. And from Lashon Hara, that's what we're talking about, learning the laws and avoiding it. But Aseh Tov, and the next thing King David says, and it's not one or the other, we have to try to work on both of these simultaneously. And it's Aseh Tov, we have to do good, right? We have to do positive actions, right? So it's learning the laws of kosher, right? It's making sure that if you are a food connoisseur, so you go make sure you treat yourself out to a nice kosher restaurant once a month or once a week or whatever it is, right? To go ahead and indulge in kosher food. So look, I could still be kosher and still enjoy my food. Aseh Tov, you got to do good, right? That's one example. Aseh Tov, of course, and a more practical example is, come to shul more, right? Come to class, do whatever it is, right? You got to make sure that you are constantly doing good. You're constantly on the positive, on the positive, right? Acting in the positive action. And how does that play a role here? All right. So it says the Chavos Havav, the Chavos explained, said that when you're speaking, it's called, instead of Lashon Hara, bad talk, we should do Lashon Tov. We should have good talk. right? So good talk means to say that you're complimenting someone, right? You're asking, a rabbi could tell a student, right? You're asking interesting questions, right? The student feels all better, right? You see someone, you say good morning to them, or you compliment them. Oh, is this a new thing you're wearing? Or you look great today, right? Your spouse, you tell them, in the morning, oh, thanks for washing the dishes. Thanks for, changing the light bulb, or, the way supper was delicious, or whatever it is, right? Constantly talking, right, in a positive manner, right? Constantly talking in a positive manner, right? And in that way, we are training ourselves, right, to not, first of all, we're training ourselves to make sure that what's coming out of our mouth is positive, right? But more than that is we're occupying our speech with positive talk. We don't have time to say negative things. Right? You only have one mouth. You have two hands. So with one hand, you could, put up a mezuzah. On the other hand, you could hit someone, right? So we have two hands, God forbid, right? But you have two hands. So our hands, right? We could do with one hand good and one hand bad. Unfortunately, usually you're doing one action, but in theory you could. But our mouth, we only have one mouth. Right? I don't know anybody that could say two things coming out of their mouth simultaneously. Right? Actually, that is one of the miracles that happened on Mount Sinai. Right? That it says that God spoke, right, to every person, and it was every language, and it was it's something that's impossible. That's sort of God. Okay, it's a metaphor because God doesn't really speak, right? And that's sort of what it means, a miracle, right? But everybody heard, and it was sort of a direct talk to every person, right? But to stay away from that, our mouth is only one mouth, right? We're only able to say one thing out of our mouth at the same time. So if we're occupying it, we're saying something good, we're doing aseh tov, we're doing something good, which doesn't allow us to do something bad. And that's in general, right, in our lives, right? When we're doing, let's say we volunteer to do chesed, we volunteer to go help in River Garden, we volunteer to help in our synagogue, right? We're using our time to give charity, or to learn, right, or to hang out with our kids, right, or whatever it is, right? So we don't have time. It's the same thing. Time, you can only be doing one thing, Simon. Sort of, right? At the same time, we're occupying our time with doing good, so we can't do bad, right? We can't do bad because we're occupying at that point in time to do good. And that's the idea of sur meira. First of all, removing yourselves from bad situations, right? Whatever that may be, if it's eating kosher, or keeping Shabbos, or davening, or whatever it is, right? And then aseh tov, right? Doing positive, right? Doing something that's positive. Right? And that again, in regarding our speech, right, plays a tremendous role, because if we're talking positive about people, we're constantly saying good things, right, then we cannot say something negative at that point. Besides that, we're training ourselves, right, to talk positive, right, and you'll see that you start thinking twice before you're ready to say something negative, because it is a muscle, and we're training ourselves to speak positive, but you also don't have time. You don't have time to say something negative, right? So that's what it means over here, and they have a whole bunch of different examples that they give, right? But that's one of the ideas that we could think about, right, as we're speaking and we're talking, is because something that we do all the time, right? Most of us, right, is right. So we have to remember this idea, which is a global idea in Judaism, in our daily lives, of sur meira v'aseh tov. Right, but in our speech, that the more we talk positive, right, we don't have time to say negative things. We only do one thing, but also you're training yourself to speak positive. And that really takes us to the quote from the Chavos Avavos, right, that says, and we'll end with this, and we'll take questions and answers if anybody has. The tongue stands as a gate of one's conscience, and when the gate is guarded, the treasures within it is guarded as well, right? The tongue, right? Lashon, our speech. If we don't have a tongue, we can't speak, right? Right. So our lashon, our tongue, that's why it's called lashon, right? Our tongue, it is the gate, right? Is a keeper, right? So if we guard our tongue, right, then we'll keep the treasures, right? The treasures within it is guarded as well. But when we don't guard our tongue and just let it, as someone once coined, be like a toilet bowl. You know, just keep on flushing, and just keep on talking, right? Just a running toilet, right? So then we're not guarding ourselves, right? And we are in bad shape. But right, if we do guard it and we make sure that we're sincere about it, and we guard what we're saying, and we make sure that we speak positive, right? Then we're going to keep all the jewels inside, and it really changes our whole day. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Just a quick reminder, there's a Lunch and Learn tomorrow, and that Lunch and Learn, right,